We have a motto here in Auburn. This is the work. Whatever the challenges we have in front of us in supporting all of our students, we lean into it. We look forward to it. We embrace the challenges that come up every day as we look at how to meet the needs of our very diverse community. Back in the 1920 school year, we were looking at our numbers around the use of isolation, a school year that was shut down by the pandemic. By March, we had 344 recorded incidents of isolation. And we knew we needed to change. We knew we needed to shift our mindset of how we look at our students. Because the choice is clear. When we support our students, we can either anticipate needs and support, or we can respond to the behaviors of unmet needs. And we were doing the responding over and over and over again, and it was leading to traumatizing situations for students. And so we decided to shift our mindset as an entire system. And I have many, many stories that can relate to that. Last year, one specifically, we had a student move into Auburn that came from out of state. And the student came with a file that was this thick. And let's just call this student Kevin. Kevin came with an extremely thick file of all of the things that have happened in the past 4 years in education. And he had previously been in a behavior program. And instead of automatically assuming that he would require a behavior program in our district and he would automatically require use of isolation, his homeschool embraced him and really called him in, brought him in for a meeting with this parent and talked through what his needs are, what are his interests, what are his passions, what is it that he needs in order to be successful. And for the first time in his life, he, as a student, he felt heard. He's able to share how much he just seeks connection. He was able to share his experience being in a behavior program in a different state. He shared that there were many hours in just about every school day that he's lived in where he would spend time in an isolation room. He was used to eating lunch in the blue room, in the isolation room. When we were touring him around the elementary school, he was looking in every corner of the school wondering, where's the isolation room? Where's the blue room at? And sharing with him that's something that he's not going to need here because we're going to do things differently. Helped completely rewrite his story. And today he's still here with us. He rides his bike to school every single day. Yes, behaviors come up from time to time and we deal with those in those moments, but he is a thriving young man. And we are rewriting his image of what he sees as himself. We're changing his story one day at a time because we're supporting him in a way that is no longer traumatizing. This is the work. And we talk about the work in eliminating isolation. We've done this over and over and over and over again, and the numbers speak for themselves. Our isolation numbers as an entire district since the 1920 school year have dramatically dropped. This past school year, we only had 17 incidents of isolation, and a big part of that was because in April, we actually dismantled our last active isolation room. And we have focused our work on anticipating needs and supporting from the get-go, and thinking about the least intrusive way in which we can support students. Now, if you were to tell me back in the 2019-20 school year, if you were to go back 5 years and say, you no longer will have isolation rooms in 5 years, I would have said that's impossible. That can't be. I can't imagine a world. I can't imagine my district without having an isolation room. And that's okay. If you're working in schools and if you're not at that point yet, that's completely okay. In the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. And so as you embrace the work and we learn from each other here in this space today, if you can't focus on that big leap of eliminating that, just focus on the next step. What is the next right thing you can do to more ethically support our students who have these high needs? And when we take those steps, one step at a time, we can make the possible happen, right? We can make the impossible happen, right? And we can get to that large step of getting to a better place in how we support our students. Excited to be here today, excited to take part with all of you in this. Let's make it a great one.
Thank you so much for that, Patrick. Good morning. My name is Dua Ka, and I'm excited to preview the upcoming Positive Behavior Support Technical Assistance Manual from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instructions, which was really informed by the amazing work from our demonstration sites, such as where Patrick is from. Background first before I jump in. Since 2015, Washington state law has required that all uses of restraint and isolation be documented and reported to the districts, students' parents or guardians, OSPI, and the public. So in the 2023-24 academic school year, with over 1 million students enrolled in Washington schools, there were more than 3,800 distinct students were restrained and over 1,600 were isolated, leading to over 15,000 reports incidents of restraints and over 8,000 instances of isolations. And so that same year in 2023, the Washington State Legislature tasked OSPI with creating a technical assistance manual to really help districts reduce these practices. And so this was in response to the data showing that restraint and isolation really hurt both staff and students and are used disproportionately with students with disabilities, students of color, male students, and students facing economic or housing challenges, including those who are experiencing homelessness or in foster care. Furthermore, and again, this is just within the 2023-24 school year alone, we see that 85% of incidences of restraint and isolation occur with students between preschool and fifth grade. 93% of incidences of restraints and isolation occur with students with disability, even though they only comprise 60% of our student enrollment. And then we see further that students with disabilities were 25 times more likely to experience one or more incidences of restraint or isolation than their peers without. Meanwhile, Black students were 1.8 times more likely than their white students' counterparts. And American Indian Alaska Native students were 1.6 times more likely to experience one or more instances of restraint and isolation. We also see too that students of two or more races were 1.4 times more likely to experience one or more incidences. So we really see here that it is really an equity, a issue of equity as well when it comes to this book. So based off these data, the purpose of the upcoming positive behavior support manual is really to build trauma-informed, equitable, and evidence-based systems that foster safe, inclusive environments for all students. The manual provides practical guidance for educators, leaders, and was developed in partnership with our Reducing Restraint and Eliminating Isolation demonstration sites, whose expertise and on-the-ground experience really informed a lot of these strategies and tools that were included in here, especially in the MTSS alignment, individualized intervention plans, disability rights protections, and crisis prevention and de-escalation. So what I love about the manual is that it really is designed to address the most effective way to reduce restraints and eliminate isolation, which is prevention through positive and multi-tier behavior support practices. In doing so, the manual is structured into 6 sections. Section 1 is understanding positive and trauma-informed behavior support. Section 2 is school and district systems that support social, emotional, and behavioral well-being. Section 3 is classroom practices for safe and inclusive learning. Section 4 is effective support for students with extensive behavior learning needs. Section 5 is considerations for students with disability. And Section 6 is crisis prevention and de-escalation. And so these 6 sections really anchor the work that we do and really give us a shared roadmap for strengthening supports across our districts to really thrive and strive together. Understanding the manual's purpose and contents gives us the foundation that we need, and establishing clear definitions of restraint and isolation also really ensures that we are all working from the same shared understanding as we engage in this work today and beyond. And so within the manual itself, restraints is referred to as the use of physical intervention or force to control a student, including the use of a restraint device that restricts a student's freedom of movement. Whereas isolation is referred to any form of enclosure a student may not leave, This does not include a student's volunteering use of a quiet space for self-calming or a temporary unlocked location used to support a positive behavior intervention plan. And so, as we continue this work today and beyond, let's just continue to keep these definitions in mind so that we all have the same place of understanding. And as I close my piece and pass the mic back to Dr. Boyles, I just want to again note that the manual is still in the final ADA accessibility review. And once it's approved, we'll make sure to share with everyone. And then we'll also drop into the chat too the link to where you can find it once it is published. Thank you so much.
Oh, Dr. Boyles, you're on mute.
And of course, I'm mute. Thank you. We've heard a lot this morning, both from Rep. Cowan, David sharing a bit of your story. Thank you, Dr. Cobb, Patrick. It was a lot of information. So we want to take a few minutes just, again, focusing on building community, understanding what brought you here this morning. From what we've talked about thus far, what is staying with you as you're moving forward? And then just share in a small group, how did your experiences, values, or community shape your commitment to supporting students and families? In these small groups, we're hoping that folks can share authentically, again, stay curious, listen generously, and honor confidentiality. I think we're ready to start breakout rooms. So let's jump into the conversation. We'll be there for, I'm looking at time. We'll be there for, we'll say about 10 minutes.
Dr. Ross Green, who brings over 40 years of experience working with students with all types of disabilities, trauma exposures, and lagging skills. Green centers the kids do well if they can philosophy and collaborates with students to prevent crisis and conflict. He is here to show us how to do the same. Dr. Green is an internationally renowned speaker, author, Harvard professor, founder of the Collaborative and Proactive Solutions model, and has been a steadfast supporter of our work to eliminate isolation in Washington, testifying before our legislature multiple times. Dr. Green's statewide trainings, Moving from Power to Problem Solving and True Crisis Prevention, are also recorded and available for clock hours through the OSBI website. We'll make sure you have those links. Dr. Green's an invaluable resource for us. We are so grateful for your time and presence with us today. Dr. Green, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to do this. And boy, I don't often get to see what I looked like 20 years next to what I look like now. Not a pretty picture now. Anyways, let's get that off as quickly as possible. Well, that can stay. I'm going to show you a video right up front here. But first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this. I guess I view my role as keynote speaker, given that it's a 30 minutes, is you get, I want to inspire you and help you recognize that change is possible and that Washington State is actually moving way faster than a lot of other places. You are proof that although it is great to get legislation passed, you don't have to get legislation passed to make progress. Washington State is the proof of that. Doesn't mean we should give up on trying to get legislation passed, but y'all are getting there anyhow. We passed legislation here in Maine a few years ago, and the results have been more mixed. So even passing legislation doesn't guarantee you anything. Why is this so critical? I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, so you probably don't need me to talk about that. But you should be aware that a study that was published in 2021 documented 79 deaths of kids in the United States while being restrained. And of course, death is the most extreme outcome, doesn't take into account the huge numbers of injuries and the trauma caused by these practices. So I want to show you just a 2.5-minute clip from a longer video that Lives in the Balance produced with NSAR Michigan. And I'm just going to show you a few clips of it to speak to the trauma of being restrained and secluded. Just to inspire you, this could be triggering for some of you, so watch these next 2.5 minutes with discretion. This is a video that we helped NSAR Michigan, the collaborative effort between us and NSAR Michigan. They are finding it to be very useful in the persuasion department. So let's put this up here now. I think I'm sharing. Let's see if I'm sharing. Am I sharing? I'm not sharing. Now I am sharing. Let's watch 2.5 minutes of this. I've edited it just so you see some of the clips. Of course, if Washington State needs a video like this, Lives in the Balance is also happy to make that happen. But here we go.
I was, I always want to say a victim. I was a victim of seclusion and restraint throughout my childhood, so which started in elementary school, and I was very little. And I always feel like that was a turning point in my life where things started to go downhill, and it became a cycle. I remember when the first time that it happened, I was embarrassed. I was frustrated. I was angry. I had obviously, gone into freeze mode, and I don't know, didn't really know what else to do, but just shut down. And I remember that, and I also remember like having then a sense of dread, like about school, about the teacher, about my classmates who saw me, dragged out as this little kid. So being secluded and restrained, especially so early, definitely affected my ability to trust adults, all adults, teachers, professionals, and be in school. School was the most unsafe place for me to be in my entire life. And that never went away.
All I can see for people that have no idea what seclusion and restraint is that I pray that you never, ever experience that. And I pray that no one you know and love ever experiences it.
I think it begins with training. I think it begins with a paradigm shift. I think it begins with adult professionals realizing that when I have to assault a child somewhere, something has gone wrong, and the onus is on me as an adult to figure out where that went wrong and to work towards correcting it.
Who's listening? Like who can do something? Who can change something? Who can really change this system up? That's what I want to know. Who cares about our children?
Who cares about their children? You do. And that's why you are here on a Saturday morning. Um, you know how important this issue is. Um, if you want to see the entirety of that mini documentary, you can find it on the Lives in the Balance website. I'll give you the URL at the end here. On our public awareness page. Can also watch a corporal punishment video that we produced with the state of Arkansas. But this is the slide that I usually start with when I'm talking about the need to rely less on de-escalating, restraining, and secluding kids. This is the sequence of those practices. What you're seeing on the screen here is 5 bubbles in a declining sequence. That's actually symbolic. In green, I changed it from blue while I was listening to the proceedings first thing this morning because I heard Patrick talking about the blue room. I quickly changed it to green, which is in some respects a little bit more fitting, at least in one, but there's no E at the end. In green, everything that's early, what we might call true crisis prevention. In red, everything that's late, crisis management. We don't want to be late. We want to be early. We don't want to be in crisis management mode. We want to be in crisis prevention mode. The more we are truly preventing crises, the lower the odds that we will lay hands on a kid. But this is a very important sequence to go through because it lays bare some misconceptions and some common practices that a lot of people think of as crisis prevention, but aren't. What's going on in the green bubble? For now, because I've got an entire slide for the green bubble. The green bubble is where we are identifying the expectations a student is having difficulty meeting. Notice we're not identifying their concerning behaviors as we've been doing for decades because we already know what their concerning behaviors are. And because, as red bubble number 2 is going to tell us, their concerning behavior is late. We don't want to be late. We want to be early. Early is identifying the expectations the student is having difficulty meeting proactively, and proactively then doing 2 things. Number 1, solving some of those problems. In the collaborative and proactive solutions model, we refer to those unmet expectations as unsolved problems. Sometimes we also call them problems that have yet to be solved. Sometimes we also call them problems that are waiting to be solved. They're easily identified, but to identify them, we would need to focus far less on the behaviors that are being caused by those problems and start focusing instead on the problems that are causing students concerning behaviors. So one thing we're doing is we're solving those problems. In the collaborative and proactive solutions model, that problem solving is collaborative, meaning with the full involvement of the kid, and proactive, meaning early, not late. The other thing we're doing in the green bubble is we are putting some of those expectations on hold, at least for now. Not forever, for now. And at least for now, the reason we're doing that is because a lot of these kids have many unsolved problems. A lot of those unsolved problems are very old. Kids have been having difficulty meeting the expectation for a very long time. By the way, the fact that they're old makes them predictable and makes it possible for us to identify those unsolved problems proactively. But if we're not going to be able to solve them all at once, by the way, trying means we're going to end up solving none of them, then some are going to have to get put on hold. Just the green bubble is how we have helped many, many school systems dramatically reduce or eliminate their use of restraint and seclusion. The green bubble is where the action's at. But what are we mostly doing still in places that are still restraining and secluding kids? Well, the prototypical adult first response to an expectation that a kid is having difficulty meeting is red bubble number one: push harder, insist harder. Founded apparently on the belief that insisting harder elicits better performance. I got to tell you, I'm not feeling it. Um, my experience is that if you push kids harder to meet expectations you already know they cannot reliably meet, you are not going to elicit better performance. You are going to elicit red bubble number two: concerning behavior. Behavior that communicates to us that there's an expectation the student is having difficulty meeting. Of course, we knew that already. So a big question we should be asking ourselves, and this will come up in a few slides, is why are we putting expectations on kids we already know they can't meet? Is that what it means? Is that really the best definition of having high expectations? No, it's not. But I want you to notice something very important. I already pointed this out. The behavior's late. The behavior is just the frustration response. The behavior is the distress response. The unsolved problem that causes the behavior already happened. If the kid's concerning behavior is highly problematic, what are we adults going to conclude? Well, based on our crisis prevention, but really crisis management training, we're going to conclude that the kid is becoming escalated. And what are we going to do next? What our crisis prevention, but really crisis management training taught us to do next, we're going to de-escalate the kid. As depicted in this graphic, you are now very late. And if you are now very late, you cannot possibly be in crisis prevention mode. No, you're in crisis management mode. When our de-escalation efforts don't get the job done, and they frequently don't because they're late, then what do? We lay hands on the kid in the form of a restraint or a seclusion, or what you all in Washington State call an isolation, or what in prison they call solitary confinement. You are now very, very late, and you cannot possibly be in crisis prevention mode. You are really in crisis management mode. And what have we also been taught about those strategies? What have we been led to believe that those strategies keep us and the kids safer? I am aware of no data telling us that that is the case. In fact, the data and my anecdotal experience from a long time ago when I was restraining and secluding kids is that it's when we're restraining and secluding kids that they and we are actually more likely to get hurt. That is a critical slide for telling us what we should be focused on if we want to stop de-escalating, restraining, and secluding kids. Don't wait for the behavior to occur. So often we're waiting for the behavior. Nope. What we should be focused on, what we should be identifying, especially in the case of the kids who are being restrained and secluded, are the expectations they're having difficulty meeting, their unsolved problems. And in the CPS model, we have an instrument that we call the assessment of skills and unsolved problems. It's free on the Lives in the Balance website. It has been helping many, many schools get in front of concerning behavior by identifying all of the expectations particular students are having difficulty reliably meeting. What you'll also find in the Lives in the Balance website, also free, is a 30-minute video teaching you how to use this instrument. I fervently believe that if this was standard, if this was the standard pre-referral triage instrument in every school, we would almost never be laying hands on kids. Let me go back though. I talked about the ACE before I thought I was going to. See, it turns out that we're set up to be late. And set up has a double meaning. Not only are we set up to be late, I think it's a setup that we're late. There's actually a lot of money in teaching people what to do when it's already late. Um, I've got a new book coming out in February called The Kids Who Aren't Okay. And an entire chapter is devoted to this topic, the fact that we're set up to be late. And the number of things we do that are late is like 4 times longer in that chapter than it is on the screen. But I just want to run through some of these things very quickly. We're giving kids a lot of breaks these days. When, by the way, the word when tells you you're late. As in asking the question, what should we do when? I want to know what we're going to do before, so we don't find ourselves thinking about when. We think too much about when. When the kid is beginning to struggle with a particular task, we give them a break. Therefore, taking a break is late. I've worked with kids who are getting 10, 15, 20 breaks a day. 10, 15, 20 breaks on Monday simply guarantees 10, 15, 20 breaks on Tuesday, because not only is taking a break late, taking a break isn't going to solve any of the problems that are causing the kid to need the break in the first place. We're still sending kids to calming corners a lot, but the calming corner's late. When do kids access the calming corner? When they're not calm. When are they not calm? When they're having difficulty meeting a particular expectation. Once again, when there's an unsolved problem. So the calming corner is late. I've worked with kids, some of you still do, who are getting the calming corner 10, 15 times a day. 10, 15 calming corners on Tuesday simply guarantees 10, 15 calming corners on Wednesday, because not only is the calming corner late, the calming corner isn't going to solve any of the problems that are causing the kid to access the calming corner in the first place. As proof that we expect to be late, are the folks in schools that I call the late staff. The late staff, the people we expect to show up on the scene when it's late. In some schools, we call them the crisis manager. Sometimes we call them the behavior intervention specialist. Even if their job title doesn't tell us that they're on the late staff, there's lots of folks in the building we expect to show up when it's already late. Principal, assistant principal, BCBA, school social worker, school counselor, school psychologist, paraprofessional, ed tech. There's also a piece of equipment that is ubiquitous in American public schools. It's the piece of equipment that signals that we're late. Almost everybody in every school in the United States these days carries a walkie-talkie. What does the walkie-talkie tell us when it starts to squawk at us? We're late. Again, the walkie-talkie tells us we expect to be late. Being late is not a given. We don't have to be late. It's just that we're set up to be late. If we put a little thought into it, we could be set up to be early. Going to skip some of these because I'm already running late. We've been teaching adults that they should co-regulate. Great idea. The prep of co-regulating is often early. But when does co-regulating kick in? When the kid is dysregulated. It's late. Quickly, a lot of the coping strategies we're teaching kids these days teach them what to do when it's already late. What if instead we were teaching them how to anticipate, identify, and solve problems before they get frustrated about them in the first place? Then we'd be teaching them and setting them up to be early. The rest of these are self-evident. De-escalating, restraining, and secluding, late, late, late. Discipline referrals, detention, suspension, expulsion, paddling, late across the board. It doesn't have to be that way. Once again, we could be set up to be early. Being late is not a given. So besides solving problems with kids collaboratively and proactively, besides putting some expectations on hold, because you can't solve them all at once, what else is going on in the green bubble? Well, number one, in that classroom ecosystem, that classroom culture or climate, one of the most important concepts is developmental variability. I don't hear people talking about developmental variability enough in schools. It's a fancy way of saying every kid is different in every way conceivable. Every kid is different. Because every kid is different, every kid is going to need something different from us. Because every kid is different, some are going to have more unsolved problems than others. That's guaranteed. What's walking in the door in a school is developmental variability. What I've been saying lately is let's not get so caught up in our diagnoses. And that's not taking away from anybody's diagnostic pride, but I know a diagnosis that all of us meet criteria for, DV, developmental variability. Because some kids are going to have more unsolved problems than others because of developmental variability. And by the way, the quality of a school, in my estimation, is determined by the degree to which that school responds effectively to the developmental variability that's walking in the door. So good disproportionality is acknowledging not all disproportionality is bad. What's good disproportionality? Disproportionately solving problems with students because some are walking in the door with more unsolved problems than others. It's a fact. It's a given. It's the bad disproportionality that's the kind of disproportionality I worry about. That's where we are disproportionately hitting, not in Washington, but other places, restraining, secluding kids with disabilities and those with black and brown skin. That's bad disproportionality. That's the kind of disproportionality we need to get rid of. And focusing on developmental variability is going to take us a long way. We should be defining good teaching as meeting every kid where they're at. Meeting every kid where they're at. That's the definition of good teaching. That means that every student is their own reference point. Well, there goes high stakes testing. Every student is their own reference point or high expectations. So high expectations are great, so long as every student is their own reference point. That's another mentality that we have going on in the green bubble. We need to help people accurately interpret concerning behavior. As I've already said, concerning behavior is a frustration or distress response. It is not attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing. It is none of those. We ought to stop saying those things and we ought to stop writing them in our functional behavior assessments. Here's a term I could have mentioned earlier but didn't. Expectation management. Expectation management, simply defined, means don't put expectations on kids you already know they can't meet. Now, why would educators feel pressure to put expectations on kids that they already know the kid can't meet because of a lot of the pressures that we put on educators to get everybody over the same bar by the end of the school year? Expectation management, an idea whose time has come. What have we been focused on? Behavior management. You're going to be managing behavior a lot if you're not focused on expectation management. If we are focused on expectation management, we're almost never going to need behavior management. We're going to use the assessment of skills and unsolved problems in the green bubble to identify the expectations kids are having difficulty meeting proactively so that we can solve them proactively. It's what I've been saying a lot lately. If we never identify those unsolved problems proactively, then we're not going to solve them proactively. And we're always going to find ourselves in the heat of the moment, dealing yet again with a kid's frustration response, with a kid's concerning behavior. Um, that means we're going to have to prioritize. We're going to have to triage. You've heard a little bit about this already because you can't solve them all at once, because we don't want to put expectations on kids we already know they can't meet, and because there are going to be some kids who are so unstable, they're not going to be meeting any expectations anytime soon. Another very important mantra we have in the collaborative and proactive solutions model: stabilization comes before education. You're not going to get any academics out of this kid until they're stabilized. Schools need to know how to stabilize kids. Otherwise, they're going to be spending a lot of money sending them out to get them stabilized. And then finally, yeah, we're solving problems collaboratively and proactively. Look at all that we're doing in that green bubble, in addition to solving problems collaboratively and proactively. So it is critical for school staff to know how to solve those problems collaboratively and proactively, critical for them to know how to use the assessment of skills and unsolved problems. But a lot of the rest of what's on this screen relates to lenses, and everything on this screen relates to training. And Lives in the Balance is very pleased to be partnering with Washington State to deliver some of that training so that we can get rid of these archaic practices together. Thank you for inviting me to be the keynote. Hope I did my job. You all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Fabulous as always. We're so grateful for your time today. We're going to transition at this point to our panel. And before our panel, we're going to have Lee Collier speak to us today. We're incredibly fortunate to have Lee Collier with us today from New Mexico. Lee brings also decades of experience working with youth and students with extensive trauma and crisis histories. He's facilitated the state work group and authored the crisis response work group report to our state legislature, which along with the DRW and ACLU report laid the foundation for our legislation to phase out isolation and increase supports in schools to reduce restraint. Super grateful for you, Lee. Thank you. And we have an amazing panel to follow Lee's remarks. So I'll turn it over to you now, Lee.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Lee Collier. Currently I'm the Director of Special Programs at ESD 114 in Bremerton, where I oversee our MASH wraparound program, supporting our sort of highest needs students where they're at, trying to keep them in placements, helping them transition from higher level placements. And we opened our Northwater School, which is our seclusion-free program in Paulsbo, Washington, which we opened last year with support of the Chance Light Company. And we are supporting students with high need, externalized behaviors, really all around the Puget Sound, sort of Kitsap, Jefferson County area. We have kids, actually, one kid coming over on the ferry every day from King County. So really excited to do that. We're really excited to be here, and I can't believe I get to follow Dr. Green, hero of mine from really the beginning of this work. I'm going to kind of fly through some slides pretty quickly here, but so Drew went over whatever our restraint was. I just want to make sure we were grounded and knew what we were talking about, because I've gotten a lot of, I was the technical assistant support OSPI for a while about this topic, and would get calls all the time around the state about what a restraint was. If I hold a kid's hand, is that a restraint? No, that's not a restraint. It's when you hold it and don't let go. It is a restraint when you're restricting their freedom of movement, right? And Isolation, I think we get confused too, because isolation and seclusion are two different words. They mean the same thing in different places. Washington uses isolation, as Dr. Green said. Um, and that also you can isolate a student from their peers in another room with an adult, and that is not isolation. That isolation is solitary confinement. It's a practice there. We've built cells into classrooms in our schools that kids are locked into, and that is the practice of isolation. It's very similar to solitary confinement in our criminal justice facilities. So, pre-2013, prior to 2013 in the state of Washington, there was no unified statewide law governing restraint or isolation in schools. Individual institutions had their own policies. For example, the School for the Blind had a policy going back to 1999. Practices varied widely by district and program, and limited reporting and little oversight. And I have been involved in this work as a practitioner, clinician, therapist, program director, program manager, and consultant for now 20 years. I started a hands-free program in New England, a therapeutic school, working as a counselor for years. An incredible experience I learned a lot from, and found myself eventually in California at we called it an NPS, a non-public school, working with kids with significant emotional behavioral challenges. And that place very quickly was under a negotiated settlement from our California Disability Rights and the ACLU at the time, because that program was restraining and isolating way too many students. And we were forced by that negotiated settlement to make a change. And I got to tell you, I wish it was as easy as a switch we could just turn off, and we could have said, all right, let's knock it off. Let's just stop doing this. We need to replace this tool. This is something teachers, paras in schools were taught to do. I remember the first person I saw get restrained, and I will never forget it as long as I live. I was in training at a new job, and a young girl got restrained on the floor outside on the pavement of our training facility. I don't know why. I don't know what was going on. She was restrained face down. At the time, they were using floor restraints. And I remember, and we were being told, you're going to have to do that too. And I was just like, what did I get? What's going on? What did I get myself into? But when you work in these facilities, you get taught this is how you keep yourself safe from the students. That they're going to act out, and they're going to try and hurt you, and you're going to need to do these things to keep yourself safe. And the amount of unlearning we needed to do and training we needed to do to move our program away from that, it took about 3.5 years. And we eliminated the use of isolation, reduced restraint by 90% in this program. And we did it because we retrained them to do something different, to change. I've heard people say a few times today, to change the paradigm. We changed the paradigm of how we thought about kids. We took on Dr. Green's mantra of kids do well if they can. If they could do well, they would do well. So what's getting in their way? I say this because I'm telling you sort of a bit because this was pre-2013, right? This was in the mid 2000s. I actually came to Washington in 2016 after these two laws had passed. So the first law in Washington, 2013, where we defined restraint and implemented reporting procedures, but really it was just for IEPs and 504s at the time. It was pretty rudimentary. Districts were submitting them not through the sort of CEDAR system. It was through an EDS called EDS, an app that they logged into and put that information in there. And then in 2015, we have the law as it stands right now, where we sort of have all of the current reporting procedures and the current definition. So nothing has changed in the law. There have been rules that have changed, as Andrea mentioned, around the elimination of floor and wall restraints. But the law as it stands today, the RCW SHB 1240 is sort of, that's where we're at, what we've been playing with. And it is actually, if you look at other states, we are ahead of the game in many ways, and we know there's still harm being done and still so much more that we could do. And I having been a part of the team that sort of created these data entry, I think the most important thing that happened in the data part, I'm going to talk about. I got to nerd out a little bit on this for you guys. But in the data portion, when districts started submitting through CEDARS, which is the student enrollment, we knew we could start to finally code it. We knew eventually in 2018, 2019, we started being able to know which kids were getting restrained. And that was so important to look at disproportionality. And look at sort of why and who and what was really going on. Once we got that sort of student level data, there were a number of reports put out. I know there was a joint report put out by the ACLU and Disability Rights looking at restraint and the problem of that in the state. And that led to the crisis response work group, which was funded. I was honored to be able to chair that work. And we recommended a ban on mechanical and chemical restraint, prohibited construction of new isolation rooms, existing isolation rooms to be removed and repurposed, strengthening documentation and parent notification, required safety and training for staff, and establishing clear definitions and limitations. And I think we fulfilled the duties of this proviso at the time. We got everyone at the table who needed to be there that was required to be on the proviso. But I got to tell you, we did not have everyone at the table at the time. And I think that's the work we're trying to do now, is to get all the voices at the table, to get a concerted effort of how to make sure we're doing all of this together. Because I think we all understand the kind of concerns and problems, and we're going to find agreement on how to best sort of navigate this forward. So that work group put forward a bill, HB 1479, which did not pass. However, the incredible work that Dua's office has been doing with the restraint and isolation prevention programs in districts, and the manual has all been funded through this work. And it is getting us to exactly where we are today. And I appreciate also what Rep. Callan had said earlier, that while we have not passed a law since 2015, we've done incredible work in changing rules, getting people together, getting coalitions to work like this, take larger and greater understanding. So we really are. It really has. While I've been incredibly disappointed and almost heartbroken some of these laws have not passed, because I want isolation to be banned so dramatically, having engaged in it and knowing how damaging it can be. This is how this work happens. This is how this work moves forward. And we are now together today in community, moving this forward because of the work we've done thus far. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for lifting your voices, to all the people who've testified, who've told your stories over and over again, who have called our offices and told us about problems that have happened and has helped us sort of go in and support more. There's still a ton of work to be done. We are not there, but we've come a long way. And we are at a wonderful point in time for us to come together today in community to do all this. And I say all this to sort of lead into our panel. I think I'm a little early, but I always run early. So that's what happens. But I want to take a moment for our panelists to all sort of come on, and we'll do introductions and sort of get going with that. Great. So I will point to everyone one at a time. I want to see everyone's sort of faces come on the video. So Stephanie, Guy, Janice, Dorian, Tamika, can you all come on video? There we are. Great. I am going to try to cat herd this experience for everybody with as gentle a touch as possible. Right. Hi, everyone's trickling on. Great to see everybody. All right, and I'll start with my friend Janice White. Janice, could you introduce yourself and then say your pronouns, your role, and why you are here today and joined the program? So Janice, if you can go first, that would be great.
Great. I'm happy to do that. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Janice White. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Seattle. One of my children, who is autistic, was repeatedly restrained and isolated as an elementary school student. And that led to my becoming involved on an advocacy level as well. I've served in the past, been involved in the Seattle Special Education PTSA, including serving as president for 2 years. And I've testified probably on an annual basis at the Seattle School Board about issues surrounding restraint and isolation, and also testified in the state legislature many times.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janice. Great to have you here. Stephanie, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. My name is Stephanie Salazar. She, her pronouns. I am an assistant principal in the Fife School District, and I've been a part of the OSPI Reducing Restraint, Exclusion, and Isolation for the past 2 years. And we are involved in the demo site, working with pilot sites. And this has just been very close to my heart. And just very committed to making sure that our students, especially our most vulnerable students, are getting support before it becomes something restrictive.
Thank you so much. Great to have you here. My friend Guy Stevens, great to see you, sir.
Hey there, Lee. It's great to see you as well, and see some other familiar faces here. So my name is Guy Stevens, he, him, his, in terms of pronouns. I am the founder and executive director of a national nonprofit called the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, which I started, about 6.5 years ago after a personal experience. I have a son who was physically restrained, put into an isolation space, and really traumatized by the experience. And that led me to doing a lot of research, trying to figure out why these things were happening, who they were happening to, and ultimately what we could do differently. So I'm just here today to participate in the conversation and hope that we can continue to make progress. I know we can do better. And Lee, as you said, I'd love to see us moving forward with a full prohibition on the use of isolation and really reducing the use of restraint. I think there's a lot of progress to be made.
Thanks, Guy. I think I introduced myself already, but again, I'm your host of the panel, Lee Collier, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm here because this is the issue I care most about in the entire world, really. I dedicated my professional life to eliminating the use of isolation.
I don't know why my name was changed, but I'm here just so folks know. Dorian Taylor is here.
Oh, Dorian, great. Come on in.
Someone changed my name to Ross Green, and I can't change it back.
But you're not Ross Green.
When I came in, my name was Dorian, and so I don't know what happened.
Well, Dorian, please introduce yourself and your pronouns and your role and why you joined the panel. Welcome.
So sorry, that threw me off. So my name is Dorian Taylor, and sorry, I was prepared, but then I spent the last couple of minutes trying to text and it threw me off a little bit. So, but my name is Dorian Taylor, and I'm a community advocate. I work in civil rights and public transportation, and I'm here as a survivor of isolation and restraints in public schools. I live in Eatonville, but my experience was in another state a while back. But I have been involved in the legislation for a while, and my experiences have led me to this advocacy from just the how this can affect someone and for their whole lives. So.
Awesome. Great to have you here, Dorian. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we got you with the correct name and you're here. And I see that Mika Dean is also here as well. So Mika, would you please introduce yourself and say your pronouns, your role, and why you joined the panel today?
Yes, I am Mika Dean. My role is as a parent of a student who experienced isolation restraint repeatedly. And I agreed to join the panel because this became passionate for me as a mother of color and a single mother who just really struggle getting answers and getting help and getting someone to believe the experience that I was having and the impact that it was having on my child. So whenever I have the opportunity, I agree to speak in these spaces because to be able to speak is to be able to heal. And when you speak, then people can learn, and that's when real change can happen. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here, Mika. Good to see you again. Glad you're here with us. All right, our first question today, I'm going to put in the chat, and it is, what is the ongoing impact of isolation and restraint on the lives of students, families, and educators? What are some of the impacts that we don't see after those incidents occur? I'm going to go back to Janice to start, and we'll swing back around the room.
Yeah, thank you for this question. And I think, as I said when I introduced myself, one of my kids experienced isolation and restraint repeatedly as an elementary school student. The first incident I became aware of was when he was in second grade, and it continued following then. And I frankly, I don't know how many incidents there were, because I know that he was so traumatized by them that he often couldn't even tell us that they had happened to him. And the two things that I've seen really firsthand in him, and he's now 21 years old and a college student. And the two things that I've really seen that have stuck with him over the years since this happened to him is, one, it really resulted in a very high level of distrust of adults, especially adults he doesn't know or have any connection with. But even the adults who are closest to him, he struggles at times to fully trust. And I include myself in that category. And he's been able to articulate that, and he's been able to make that connection as well, that it stems from the way he was treated by adults as a young child. And the other thing that, you know, he outwardly presents today as a successful college student, and yet there are times when something can happen that triggers that freeze response that others spoke of earlier this morning. And it happened this semester, in fact. And he was triggered by something in one of his classes that led to him basically saying he had to leave that class, and he could no longer stay in that class for the rest of the semester because it triggered such an intense response. And he said to me at the time that it made him feel exactly the way he felt as a young student in public school, and that there was nothing he could do to get past that feeling, to be able to remain in that environment, that that environment had become so toxic for him that he couldn't stay there. And, you know, that has caused me to think a lot about how that's going to impact him for the rest of his life as an adult, and how he's going to have to be able to deal with those kinds of situations. And I have a lot of concerns about how that's going to impact him going forward.
Thank you for sharing, Janice. It reminds me of the body keeps the score, right? The trauma is living inside us. It can pop out at the strangest times and predictable times. Stephanie, would you like? Well, I'm just going to swing around after every question. Stephanie, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm going to speak to students witnessing and educators. You know, both they're also in that flight, fight, or freeze. And for educators that are witnessing, whether it's firsthand as a student in their classroom or they're witnessing a student come down the hall deregulated, there's so many questions. There's anger, there's feeling of self-doubt, there's complete helplessness, hopelessness, and feeling defeated. After it, they're often down the hall crying. It's hard to expect them to go back and teach after that, but they have a classroom full of other students. They're concerned about the student that has been removed from the classroom. And the students that are in there, I couldn't even imagine how they're truly feeling and how afraid they are, but to then also go home to their families and try to articulate and explain what they saw as a kindergarten, first grade, or second grade. But one of the really tragic thing that happens, and parents and students who have experienced, could tell me the other side of this, is they have to be in that classroom with the other students. And when I come in to respond and it's already too late, the first thing they do is, they're over there, they're over there. And they're pointing out this poor, unregulated student that's already losing dignity. And it's just absolutely a horrible feeling for all involved. And we often don't get to process as a team and truly lean into what happened and how do we heal in that moment, let alone later.
Thank you, Stephanie. Guy?
Sure. I'm going to jump in and just kind of join a little bit in what is being talked about already. But I think it's really important to understand that the use of physical restraint, the use of isolation, is traumatic not just for the child that's being physically restrained or isolated. It's traumatic for the teachers and staff. It's traumatic for the families. It's traumatic for other children as well. And the impact of that is lifelong. Dorian mentioned it already, that when we talk about trauma, trauma is something that can stay with us a lifetime. But if we look at the cycle of this, it's really concerning. And what we know is that traumatic experiences change the brain. And I don't mean that to be, figurative. I mean, there are actual changes in structure and function in our brain due to traumatic experiences. And with a child, or anyone, in fact, that traumatic experience can lead someone to be hypervigilant, kind of always on alert, always more likely to kind of have a stress-related behavior. And, very often what we see is, a child that already has a trauma history, because we know that kids that are more likely to be physically restrained or put in isolation are children with disabilities. Black and brown kids are more likely to be restrained and isolated, and kids that already have a trauma history. There's a tremendous intersection with trauma and disability as well. So we know there's already that connection of trauma. And what we see is that, kids that are having a difficult time, kids that are having a big, maybe an unexplainable stress behavior, are often met with compliance demands. Those demands often lead to escalation. That escalation often leads to a fight or flight response. And then we see, physical restraint, isolation, other things happen. The key here is that physical restraint or isolation compounds existing trauma, and it makes the nervous system more hypervigilant, and it leads to more behavior, not less behavior. The same cycle actually applies to teachers and staff as well. There's nothing pleasant if you're an educator about physically restraining or pulling a child into an isolation space. In fact, it can be a very traumatic experience. But what we find is that trauma compounded on the adult nervous system leads to a hypervigilant adult. A hypervigilant adult, much more likely to restrain or isolate a child again in the future. So the more these things happen, the more it feeds the cycle. And there are better things that we can do leading to better outcomes. So again, the trauma from all of this is really, I think a significant factor. And, kind of in your question, I mean, people often don't understand, you can't physically restrain a child on a Monday and expect that they're going to come back to school on a Tuesday as if nothing has happened. That is a traumatic experience. So, anyway, these things have a tremendous long-term effect. And I think understanding the connection to an individual's, brain and body and how this all kind of continues a cycle of harm is really important.
Thank you, Guy. Reminded of a great quote someone told me once: when you restrain kids, you have to restrain kids. It creates this vicious cycle. Dorian?
Mhm. Yeah, this is a question, and I would even just start with, even though I volunteered for this, right? It brings up trauma to the point that I have to prepare to speak about my experiences, and then one little thing cut me off, just as it did in an introduction of myself, all of these years later. Um, I think that the one thing about lifelong trauma and the how it affects you outside of school as someone who has personally experienced this is In my brain, even all these years later, I'm in my mid 40s now, and it's hard for me to separate the abuse I experienced at home from the abuse I experienced at school, because a lot of a lot of times people don't take into consideration I didn't have um, a loving home. I Not that my parents didn't love me, but they also didn't have the tools, and they also were. I'm the first generation out of segregation, so they didn't know how to talk to white teachers, and experience and didn't have experience with that. I was often the only Black child in the classroom, so that experiencing that kind of isolation, and so in my brain, it's physical abuse in the classroom and physical abuse at home, and it was very much a compounded trauma that lives in my body. I'd like to say I have a beautiful life now, but there are times where it comes up, and I don't even think about it. Like I can be sitting on the couch with my partner and just remember um, the violence, and I think about, like, in my brain, what would possess somebody to do that to a child. But it took me a long time to realize that these were things that they were taught as tools. And but what happens is I also wasn't taught the tools that I needed to regulate and to self-regulate. And while there wasn't as much tools in the 80s and 90s as we have today, uh, it I was an adult before I could even process my emotions around the harm that I experienced, because it was so normalized to have adults grab me when my emotions were too much, that I thought it was okay to be afraid of me when my emotions were too much. Um, and that led to, I believe, years of self-medication and fear of my own emotions, because if adults were scared of my emotions when I was a child who was too young to describe my emotions, then there must be something to fear. uh, um, uh, it was, I would say, honestly, decades of peeling back the layers of trauma to really understand the harm that I experienced, which has led me to the advocacy that I do today. And it's also took years before I spoke about it in therapy, because it was some really violent things that happened to me, but I also didn't recognize it as violence because it was so normalized, because it was institutionalized, and because I had experienced it so young and in elementary school for so long. I didn't think that it was violence until I was old enough to understand the concept of state violence. And I think that, and I have a friend who is a teacher who has, you know, restrained children, and we kind of go round and round when we talk about this, because it is hard for him to understand that what he's doing is a form of state violence, because they think that they are protecting someone, and they don't realize that what they could be doing could create lifelong harm for somebody. So,
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Dorian. Luca, would you like to answer the question?
Sure. I think one of the things about the ongoing impact for families, educators, and students is it's very divisive. You get folks who firmly believe that it is sometimes it's the only tool or their last resort, not caring about the harm it's causing to the student. And as an adult, I've heard them say, well, I have to protect myself and I have to keep myself safe. And it's like, how is this student's emotions a threat to your safety? And most times, what I've witnessed, especially with my son, is that he wasn't violent toward educators. He would have a escalation where he's just verbalizing and maybe using profanity and just walking around the class. And because he wasn't complying with their demands, he was met with isolation and restraint. And I think the bigger answer for me, or, what I really want to emphasize is folks, these students come home, right? They come home to parents and they are escalated and they are confused and they are scared. And the gaslighting that happens within the system to justify the practice, I believe my son, through that form, was taught that the only way I can manage my emotions is if someone restrains me when I get out of control. So it's almost I'm escalating an expectation to be restrained because that's what I've been taught. And it teaches them that to expect violence. And it took a long time. And now I'm not an educator. I have no clue what goes on in the classroom. And so now my son is coming home and he is fighting his siblings, he is fighting me, and he is fighting all of us. And we're trying to find the healthiest way possible to respond. And so I think the impact is they do come home. And my son now, he's not sure how to advocate for himself, and he's also not sure how to defend himself. It's almost like, and now he's 12. My son stands 6'3", 280 pounds. And so you can imagine the justification that happened where he's bigger than other students. He had, yes, this other student did initiate this interaction, but he's bigger. So the emphasis was put on his size and not real solutions to put on the behavior. And so now he won't even defend himself when he's being bullied because he believes they're automatically going to take the other person's side because of his size alone. So the impacts is on the home life as well, on his ability to make same aged peers. It's all impacted by the use of isolation and restraint.
Thank you for sharing that, Mika. All right, we're going to start with Stephanie this time with our next question as I cruise along here. The question is, how can educators and families partner more authentically to prevent incidents of restraint and isolation? And Stephanie, why don't you hop on?
Perfect. I'm going to, I think, share a short little story of success, really shifting educators' thinking on that partnership. Too often we wait till the end. We call and we're like, oh, your kid did this and they were restrained. And then what, right? So that's not okay. That's not okay. But often we don't hear the student's voice. We don't hear the parent's voice. They're in trauma as well. They don't trust us. They don't know what to think. We had a kindergartner who was a gen ed student. They're all gen ed students first, but this particular one did not have any accommodations or supports. And she would scream. She would just become so dysregulated, she would just scream. And I definitely have some hearing loss from this child. Loved her to death. But when she screamed, you could hear it down every hallway. And so we had to figure out how to support her. Immediately, we called the parents. We found out what it was like at home. We found out who was her calm person, her safe person, who was the person we could call when she needed to de-escalate herself. Who could she call as a proactive, like, let's call before it gets there. And we worked out a beautiful plan. Luckily, they were able to accommodate that. Not all of our families can accommodate that. They're working 2 jobs. They have several other restrictions in life, and they can't just come up to the school, or they can't accept the phone call. So we have to really partner with them in a very different way. But if you're not asking that parent, hey, what works at home and what are you seeing at home? Oh, we're seeing the same thing. Well, we have to be consistent. And with this little girl, because we were so consistent, it still was a rough few months, but we figured out how to de-escalate her. What we were still missing is what was the trigger. That is the harder thing to catch. An educator is teaching, they've got 20 other students in there. They're not seeing that little subtle cue. They don't have the intentional, not intentional, the appropriate enough of time to take all of the data and really see what are we missing. So then it became the school counselor and myself and anyone else that was available to just go in and do some monitoring of what was escalating the student, what was the trigger. Today, She's a little spicy thing. She's now in second grade. She has not been restrained and she has not been isolated. I'm not saying she hasn't come down to have some chats with me or just earn a great break. She has several advocates in the building, and we still communicate as a team, and our parents couldn't be prouder and feel more connected. And that's the difference right there. If the family doesn't have the trust and doesn't feel connected, we're not going to get anywhere, and it's going to become like you said, Mika, that gaslighting. It's not okay.
Trying that, Stephanie. Guy?
So, it's an interesting question. I think it's an important question because, when we begin to collaborate together, we tend to come up with some of the best solutions. Lee, as you know, I'm a big believer in going upstream. And what I mean by that is that, by the time we arrive at a crisis where restraint and isolation are even on the table, there have been a lot of things that have already happened, and there have been a lot of opportunities that have potentially been missed. At the Alliance, we often talk about, well, what do we do differently? What's the alternative here? And, over time, I've kind of put that into kind of a long statement, but, we believe that the approaches need to be shifted into trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, neurodiversity-affirming, relationship-driven, and collaborative approaches. And what I mean by that is that, again, restraint and isolation are reactive strategies that happen because a lot of other things went wrong before we got here. When I find a child that has been physically restrained or forced into isolation, what I see beneath the surface is a child whose needs we have not appropriately met. If we had appropriately met their needs, we probably would not have arrived at this point. So, I think when it comes to, what parents and educators can do, first of all, I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to shift ideas and perspectives around behavior and the response to behavior. I would say a lot of the things that we're doing are not working for a lot of children that need help the most. If they were working, we wouldn't see the data that we see about things like restraint and isolation. So, in my mind, it's really important. How do we focus on programs that help to educate not only parents, but also teachers and staff to shift away from a lot of these approaches that are just not working for our kids? I often ask when I speak, and I often speak to, crowds that might be parents and caregivers and educators, and I'll ask a question like, who here loves a child that has been on had a FBA done, a functional behavioral assessment, or maybe has had a behavior intervention plan developed? And a lot of hands go up because a lot of the people that I work with are often working with children who have had difficulty. And the next question is, who has a child that they love who has had a behavior intervention plan that has worked well? And almost no hands go up. A lot of what we're doing is not working. And this means we really need to focus on how do we shift approaches? How do we move upstream to better understand the deeper why beneath the behavior? And again, when you take those principles, when we understand the impact of trauma, how it changes the brain, when we move to a neuroscience aligned approach around behavior, people still look at a lot of behaviors and they think they're intentional. A lot of behaviors coming from the bottom up. It's stress behavior. It's related to individual differences, disability. Shifting perspectives there is really important, because if you think you can change a behavior by offering an incentive or offering a consequence, if you don't understand why it's there. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And when we can think about how to bring educators and families together and bring some of this information to them, I think there's a tremendous potential to shift things. So at any rate, collaboration, that's where a lot of this comes from. It's not just a principle on how you better support children, but when we collaborate with families, when we collaborate with the community, we're gonna have much better results.
Guy? Dorian?
Yeah. This is a good question. I think partnering with families is a critical part, and if but I also think that it's really important to have cultural sensitivity in when collaborating with families, because uh, you know from my experiences, I can tell there was a little bit of a patriarchal uh, sentiments towards my parents and the way that they were treated, and it created a hostile environment where there were no solutions to be had. And I think that where appropriate, it's also important to um, include the child, and I say that it's you know I knew that I was being talked about, and I might not have been able to understand everything that was going on, but you know at 8 or 9 years old, I knew they were having these meetings that were making some sort of decisions about the way the rest of my school experience was going to be, and that I was taking all of these tests and doing all of these things, and no one told me anything about anything and what any of it meant, and that really set me up. Didn't set me up for success either. If it would have been really great to know what a trigger was at a much younger age, and to know that there were things causing the behaviors. I think for me, I didn't understand that there were things causing it, and so I internalized that as me being like a bad person and a bad kid. And um and um and I often talk about sometimes that one day I will write about what it's like to be the bad kid, and that's still something that I hold. I'm not a kid anymore, right? And I still hold that inside, right? And it would have been a gift to know that there were things that I could have avoided, right? So that, because that like I didn't want to do that either, right? And I think that's often forgot about. So.
Thanks, Dorian. Mika.
What I like to say is continuity of information. If there are several agencies involved with the student, if it's therapy, if it's an after school program, if it's mentorship, if it's Seattle Children's Hospital, whatever program, I feel like everyone should be on the table or at the table when it comes to addressing the needs of the child. And oftentimes that is not happening. They treat it very separate, and also de-weaponizing diagnoses. I don't know how many people are familiar with the adverse impact statement that is usually somewhere in an IEP. And what is written in that IEP kind of dictates what the IEP will address. And I remember going in and finding so many negative things in that impact statement that didn't speak true to what the actual issue my son was having, but also it was an adverse impact statement based off the experience of isolation and restraint that he kind of really battled with at the school. So it's like you caused this thing to happen, and now you're putting it in a statement, utilizing it as a weapon of why his IEP is written the way that it's written. And I feel like in order to do that, well, in order to bring, to me, it's right, I call it real change. Not, something that sounds good or looks good on paper or make folks that make policies feel better, but real change, things that we can see in the school and in the home and the community, is transparency, and really kind of dismantling those historic stereotypes around people of color in parenting, also parents of students with disabilities, and how folks really feel and believe about those students. I am a fan of a good pivot. If you are not connecting with this child, please pivot yourself off this child's team. If you are not a fan of this child, please remove yourself. You don't have to be here. And I think the thought to educators is, I have to be here. This is my job. If you are not good at this part of your job, please remove yourself. We will not think less of you. We will honestly think more of you. And I think that's what needs to address too, is this question is, if I'm not handling this child, then I'm not good at my job. When it's once again centering the adult experience over the child's. We need to really start centering these students' experience at the expense of any adult, because I feel like I've live to be the age I am, and they should be allowed to get to live to the age that they have been destined to live without as much, I want to say, harm as possible. So that's kind of where I sit on that one.
Well said. Thank you, Mika. All right, our next question is,
Lee, do you want me to answer this one?
oh, yeah. Sorry, Janice. I forgot we're going around the horn. I didn't go all the way around.
Yeah,
Of course
no
I do.
worries. I will be brief. I think that the for educators and families to partner more effectively, they need to have shared language and shared understanding of how to address the expectations on the child in that particular school environment. And just from my own personal experience, during the years in which my child was being restrained and put into isolation repeatedly, our family at home had discovered Dr. Green and his, his approach to dealing with concerning behavior and dealing and addressing the expectations. And we were implementing those at home and finding great success. And so we would come to meetings at school, to IEP meetings, and talk about that and talk about how we needed to transfer that approach to what was happening at school, and we encountered great resistance. And because we didn't have a shared understanding of how to best meet his needs and address those expectations, the restraints and isolations increased in frequency, leading to his refusal to attend school because it was such an unsafe environment for him. And what we experienced is that when we were able to change the school environment later and get him, into a school that had a very different culture and approach, and with more shared understanding and shared language, it wasn't, like flicking a switch, as you said earlier, Lee, but over a 6-month period, I would say, it just completely shifted to, his being able to demonstrate that he really was very capable and he was interested in learning and being able to demonstrate success. So, and that was because in that school, we did have shared vocabulary, shared language with the educators and the staff at the school.
Apologies for jumping the gun there. All right. Our next question is, can you share the relationship between isolation and restraint and the school to prison pipeline? We're going to start with Guy.
Sure. So, what we know if we look at the data is the children who are more likely to be restrained, isolated. As I mentioned before, it's children with disabilities, Black and brown kids, kids that already have a trauma history, often very young kids. We can look at other forms of punitive exclusionary discipline, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment in some states. And we know all the same children that are more likely to be restrained, secluded, suspended, expelled, and subjected to corporal punishment are also far more likely to end up moving down the school to prison pipeline. And this happens down a pretty predictable pathway. If you are going to school and, you are being restrained or isolated on a regular basis, school does not feel safe. School does not feel welcoming. As Dorian mentioned earlier, you begin to internalize this. You're the bad kid. It was mentioned earlier how other kids will then begin to call out, you for your behavior. School does not feel welcoming, does not feel safe. And what we see in very young kids is often a lot of school avoidance. And that's often their nervous system telling us something, that environment is not safe to them. And they're kind of sometimes refusing to go to school because it doesn't feel safe and supported. As children get older, we find that, again, the kids that have had these things happen to them. And when we're talking about, restraint and isolation, people often don't realize, but we're talking about the youngest kids. We're talking about 6, 7, 8-year-olds who are far more likely to be physically restrained and isolated. I was talking to an educator just recently, and they were noting how, well, gee, by the time they get to middle school and high school, we don't see this. And there happens to be a good reason for that. When kids get larger, we think twice about going hands-on. But truth be told, we should be thinking twice about going hands-on with any child because it can really cause a tremendous amount of harm. So we know that these same children who, as they get older, might be more apt to end up in the juvenile justice system. And from there, the criminal justice system is a very, very small step. And what we find, if you look at the data, 60% of prisoners and inmates identify with having some sort of disability. You track the data, restraint, seclusion, punitive exclusionary discipline, it's all leading in the same direction. And it's a failure. It's a systemic failure. And we can do better. We can absolutely do better for children, for educators, for families in our communities.
Thanks, Guy. Dorian, I know you've already touched on this topic. Would you like to add?
Yeah, this is a great question and great topic. Call myself a survivor of the special education to prison pipeline. I have experienced this in my life, and it's it wasn't until I got out of prison and was seeing a psychiatrist that I was ordered to see, that I'd heard of the term PTSD, things like institutionalization, um, and I think that school isolation and the restraints, it's a form of institutionalization. I had also experienced residential homes and other forms of institutionalizations, but so even being at home and in public schools, I was still having those same carceral experiences that you have in a hospital, or I didn't go to juvenile. I went straight to adult. It was charged as an adult at 17, and so I think that it's important to realize that it's not just large kids that experience this. I'm not to this day, I'm not a large person, but I'm just a Black person, and experienced police following me when I wasn't even being violent. I would just try to find a place to hide sometimes to calm down, and would have police chase me into the places that I was trying to calm down, and would be dragged into these isolation rooms. And that's a form of carceral violence. Even if I don't go to jail, even if a police dragging a young child and putting them into a room that they can't leave until somebody says it's okay to, is a form of carceral violence. And it escalated the situation, and creates another layer of harm on top of the harm that is created in schools from that type of environment. So.
Thanks, Dorian. Mika, and before I throw it to Mika, I just want to let everyone know we have about 4 or 5 minutes left total, so the panel. So, Mika, you're up next.
Thank you. For me, in my experience with my son, the school was taught to call the police. And so the interactions between my son and the police were negative. They use very threatening language. They never de-escalate. I have never seen an officer come and de-escalate the situation. They often escalated. And thankfully, I was able to get there in time to kind of help de-escalate the situation. But that connection is very prevalent, because every time you call, there's a record created. And if this student then goes on to get pulled over, whatever this case is, that record gets pulled up. And so they're going to address that student, or even as an adult, as a violent person. So that connection is very, very obvious to me at this point. We've done so much research on it for so many years that I feel like we can, sometimes it's a little bit frustrating, because we keep having to prove the same thing. Why do I have to keep proving that the school system is intentionally harming Black and brown students and those students with disabilities? Why are we keep having to prove this in this day and age?
Janice?
My child had the police called on him when he was in the 5th grade. And so we had personal experience with this, and we recognized it as a crossroads for him, that we had to do something. We had to really dramatically make sure that this wasn't going to happen again, because the more it happened, the more he was going to, enter into that pipeline. And we also recognized right away, it was one of the first things my husband said to me after he was able to bring my son home, was the different response from the police officers because my husband was white. And we recognize that. And I've tried to sort of incorporate that into the advocacy work that I've done since then.
Stephanie?
This is something that's always been heavy on my heart, and the school is absolutely 100% operating the way it's supposed to be for our marginalized students and most at risk. And how do you break that? Because you're right, we've been talking about this for way too long. The evidence is there. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing team that is in alignment with my own beliefs. I don't want to see an SRO or a police officer coming in here to handle a student. I'm in a K-5 environment with 867 students. The one time we did have to call the police is because the child ran off campus. And I couldn't keep up with the kid as much as I tried running up that street. People saw me chasing a grown adult, chasing an African-American student up the street. And, to keep tabs on him, I had his mom on the phone. We were running. We had other people in vehicles. Someone saw us running up a busy street and they called. When they got there, I absolutely would not let this child have any hands on with this officer until a parent got there, just being very aware. But unfortunately, not all educators do take that stance and realizing the contributions they make. I'm very fortunate, again, in this district that we are aware of that and we have those conversations. It is not okay. A kid who has been restrained and doesn't understand how to regulate themselves, because why would they? They're 6, 7, 8. They become reliant on adults to put their hands on them to help regulate them. And then we just go into autopilot and start doing it as a means of communication for that student. And my heart breaks for you, Dorian. I deeply apologize on behalf of educators. The same thing to Janice and Mika.
We're at time, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie, thank you, everyone. Thank you, the panel. So many thoughts and comments. I think for the last one, I can't help but think about the importance of implicit bias training for all of our providers. That one of the biggest problems I had in training staff my whole career to work with students was the white providers, very specifically, who misinterpreted the behavior of our Black and brown children as aggressive when it was not, as violent when it was not. This is a problem that is an ongoing problem in our system. And while we do not do our training and have our providers looking like our students, this is going to be a continuing problem in our systems as we support all of our students. Great panel. Thank you all so much. That was a real pleasure and honor to be with you all.
Thank you, Lee.
We're on a break. There you go, Andrea. Take over.
Thank you so much, everybody. I want to take a moment and lift enormous respect and gratitude for each of our panelists. I am blown away every time when we have survivors, families, and those with restraint and isolation experience speak to us. Representative Callan mentioned this earlier, but it is so taxing. They have to prepare beforehand and come and speak and reshare and open up all their trauma all over again to strangers. And then they have to recover afterwards. So there's a staggering level of educational labor that goes into this for our benefit. And I just want to lift that and give deep gratitude and thank you to everybody here. Thank you to Lee for leading us in the space. We are going to shift into a break. Take a minute, recenter yourself, do your deep breathing, and we will be back in 10 minutes to transition into some workshops with down-to-earth and practical advice to build classroom systems that prevent restraint and isolation. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're entering the final part of our summit. The last chunk here, we're really going to slow down, reflect, and connect everything we heard today. This closing space, it really isn't just about wrapping up. It's where our learning becomes movement. It's where stories, data, and lived experiences come together and point us towards what's possible. We'll take some time to reflect individually. We'll talk a little bit in small groups and then contribute to our statewide harvest of insight and commitment. By the end, our hope is that we'll leave feeling aligned, grounded, and clear on our next steps in eliminating restraint and isolation across Washington state. As we settle into this reflection, I want to bring us back to the purpose of today, the purpose that shaped every story, panel, insight. We gathered to expand healing-centered, prevention-focused practices across our statewide network. We gathered to deepen our shared commitment to reducing and ultimately eliminating restraint and isolation in schools. We gathered to strengthen systems that support educators because when adults are supported, students are supported. We gathered to learn from research, lived experiences from families, educators, and advocates. And we gathered to center Black disabled students and students with IDD and those at the intersection in all solutions because they are and must continue to be our moral and practical compass. Everything we heard today reinforces a truth we now hold collectively. Restraint and isolation are not necessary tools, and together we're building systems and skills that make them obsolete. So we'll begin with a moment just for you to pause, to breathe, chance to settle in all that you've taken in today. We heard powerful stories, so powerful stories that are like really resonating with me and I'm sure many others. We heard data that clarifies the impact of restraint and isolation. We heard strategies that show what's possible when we lead with prevention, connection, and humanity. Take a look at these prompts. Choose one that speaks to you. What is one insight from today that you can't stop thinking about? Where do you feel a shift in understanding compassion or responsibility? What's a story, strategy, or moment that will influence your practice? I'll give us the full 90 seconds. Feel free to write, type, or simply sit with the thought. And I'll give us 90 seconds here just in silence. Okay. We'll take one more breath. I see Christina already threw some thoughts into the chat. If others would like to, I also welcome you to throw your reflections in the chat. And there's no need to as well. Those were definitely for you. We're gonna move into small groups now, and this is where learning deepens through community. Before we begin, always want to offer a few grounding reminders. Please share authentically, stay curious, listen generously, honor confidentiality, and let's center their humanity in each story, just as we've done all day. Um, in small groups, your questions are: what learning felt most relevant to your role? What did you hear today that challenges or affirms your current approach? How might your team, school, or community benefit from what you learned today? And as you share, think about what it means for your role, whether that's as a parent, a student, educator, or further removed from the classroom. We each have a part in eliminating restraint and isolation and reducing harm is a collective effort. So we'll have about 10 minutes together. If we can open the rooms, hopefully you're going back to the same room that you started with today. It's been a few hours now, so not sure if you remember. But if not, welcome you to jump into whatever room and get started with our reflections.
If anyone needs help joining the breakout room, feel free to let me know and I can help you. Hey, Sarah, did
Didn't
I help?
unmute. Sorry. Yeah, I booted myself out of my breakout room accidentally. Can I I can put myself back in, huh? Yep, here
you
we go.
sure can.
All right.
All right.
Dr. Boyles, I put the link to the Padlet in the chat as well if people want to use that to capture. And that way we'll be able to kind of go back and look at it. So I see at least a couple folks have been in there already.
Perfect. Yes, we'll take some time on the next slide to give people a chance to introduce that and kind of hear what happened in the groups.
Perfect.
And it looks great. Thank you for doing that.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Michelle or Paul, do you need help joining a breakout room? And Dr. Boyles, do you want me to close these at about 11:35, or do you want to give a little more time than that?
If we hold on. Oh, I definitely didn't break this out on the guide. Shoot, Brittany. Hold on a second. We have we'll do like 10 minutes in the Padlet. 5, 10. Yeah, 35, 45, 55. 35 feels perfect.
Okay, I'll give them a 5-minute warning right now.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. I'll go ahead and close the rooms now and give them the 60 seconds.
Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. Okay, I know that went super quick. These last reflections are, I want to highlight, is everyone back yet? Sorry, I should have too many.
In about 15 seconds, they will be.
Okay, great. I'll give it a second then. Oh, here we go. I see everyone coming in now. Okay. Thank you for honoring each other's stories and insights in those breakout rooms together. I know they went pretty quick. Want to highlight Sarah just before we went into breakouts, put into the chat a link to a Padlet that I see some folks have already jumped into, but would like to gather our collective wisdom, our insights, our shifts, commitments, barriers, hopes, and supports. You can click the link in the chat or you can scan the QR code on the Padlet. What you share here becomes part of our statewide learning, and these reflections really help to shape like policy guidance, training needs, future support. And I invite you as you post there to think about everything we heard today from Dr. Callan's start, Patrick's reminder that dysregulation is communication, Dr. Kaw's clarity on what restraint and isolation are and why they harm, families and students who shared long-term impact, like decades-long impact. Dr. Ross Green's reminder that lagging skills can be taught, the panel's insights about partnership, prevention, the pipeline, to the workshops that showed how adult regulation and pattern recognition change everything. I'm confident I've missed a ton within that, and I apologize. However, I want to invite you to let your reflections be grounded in what's true and what's possible and what you're ready to step into. So I'll give us some time for folks to share their voice. I'll also add the Padlet here on the screen and invite folks if they want to share out for the larger group as well. Now would be a great time to do that. Deanna, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that, I've been interested in Ross Green's work and attended his trainings and am still not clear on how this works with our students with minimal or no access to reliable communication. And when I think of the families that come to me in our community who have children facing isolation and restraint, it is most often those very children. And so I guess I'm left still a bit undone knowing how to help.
Definitely hear you there. Thank you for naming that. I also welcome you to throw that into the into our harvest here. So resources are supports needed is a place that I could definitely see that living. Is it Berlin?
Yes. I apologize for interrupting you, but I got kicked out of the meeting. I was in breakout 2. Can you please put me back in there? I can't seem to put myself back.
We're back whole group now. So
Oh,
the breakouts have closed.
oh, okay.
I see Ramona in the chat. See the child's perspective, not adult's perception. Listening to the child is huge. That was also a theme. I think it was Mika on the panel who was really highlighting that for us as well. I'll welcome others to jump in as well, but just kind of highlighting some of the things on the Padlet that are standing out. Insights in learning, people are naming how restraints and isolation felt like firsthand and the psychological trauma it causes years down the road. Someone named co-regulation is too late. Approach challenging students the way you want to be treated. I remember that golden rule as a kid, you treat others the way you want to be treated. But as we grow up and these power dynamics come into play, that becomes something that's unfortunately a little too easy to forget. See the child's perspective, not adult's perception. Yeah, that's I think you just transferred that over. Thank you. Shifts in my practice. Oh, this one's staying with me. Restraint and isolation is not solely on the individual, but the family and community as well. So just the ripple effects. Those practices also change the way they view themselves for the rest of their lives, even with intense intervention and therapies. Yeah. So that just highlights the importance of shifting practice because we're changing the course of people's lives. Commitments. Someone's able to support students at my school who experience these issues to provide them with unconditional positive regard. When I encounter them in the hallways or school, just a simple act of kindness from an adult can go such a long way to know they are seen and valued. So true. To be a leader in my district in making small, actionable shifts. Earlier this morning, I was in a breakout and someone named that their district wants them to practice restraint and isolation and they are refusing to. I think that is huge. And I really want to highlight that while sometimes it doesn't feel like we have the power to do so, while it may cost us sometimes, we do have the power to say no. So I want to say thank you for saying no and encourage others to stand alongside them. Barriers, strong collective action is more relevant. Training for staff who are used to the traditional ways, yes, of addressing restraint and seclusion, showing them the data and long-term impacts their actions have. And what I hear here is really supporting folks in the transformational learning that needs to happen, especially as we folks have been educators for so long. It's just the way we do it. So really learning and growing as our society is growing and shifting. Providing training at school level, not just for certified, but classified staff as well. Absolutely. especially since classified staff are the ones that are typically paired with students that have a need for one-to-ones. Thank you for adding these. Some hopes for students most impacted to understand them and are able to recognize the student's triggers in order to provide help prior to the episode. Definitely, I think Dorian, when you were speaking on the panel, that like really hit like, wow, if I knew my triggers, how impactful, like I didn't want to do this stuff either. So teaching our kids as much as we're learning alongside them. Students get the education and supports they need and deserve. Connection, a team, becoming a team. Teams are so powerful. I'm not going to continue reading these. I'm going to pause and continue moving us. But highlighting, if you need supports or resources, please add them here. We've also added, Sarah, thank you so much for adding a ton of resources and tools over here for folks to use as it's helpful to them. Everything that's been shared in the chat today is here, and this Padlet will remain active. So just use at your pleasure. I'm going to shift us a little bit into our final kind of collective pulse, if you will. And we're going to choose, hopefully, let me see if I can find my screen. There we go. One word that captures how you're leaving today's summit. I love a Wordle. There's a couple slides within here, but really want to highlight where are folks at today. We've spent the morning together really digging deep into a few different angles of restraint and isolation, but want to know where folks at. Like this is our first time too, and hope that it was a valuable use of everyone's time. So I'll leave the code here. You can go to menti.com, enter the code on the screen, or you can scan the QR code. As words begin to appear, notice what rises, the emotions, the grounding, the shared sense of purpose. Like the emotional truth is important data for us too. It tells us how today impacted you and how we move forward together. So I will shift to see that and hope we can all share out some words. Oh, this is me not knowing how to use this thing. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, there we go. I was worried for a second. Thank you. So grounded is pretty big, empowered, committed, hopeful. Reinvigorated, fired up. Lots of these are branches of the same as well. Reflective, overwhelmed, I see. Yeah. Connected, grateful. Churning, empathetic. I see folks in the chat over here as well, feeling informed. Thank you for naming where you are. There's some other questions on here as well. So invite folks to, oh, I see people are already doing it, making commitments and adding to these slides. I welcome you to continue doing that. However, before we close, I want to shift back clunkily, sorry. Let's see. I want to invite you to take a moment of intention and choose just one action that you're ready to take, one that aligns with what you learned today and what your role or your current positional power allows you to influence. Maybe it's one practice you'll shift next week. Maybe it's one assumption you're ready to unlearn. Maybe it's strengthening a relationship that supports prevention. Or maybe it's modeling one healing centered behavior for your team. Or maybe it's sharing one idea with someone who wasn't able to join us today. The workshop leaders reminded us that small shifts can prevent crisis. Dr. Ross reminded us that children do well when they can. And families reminded us that harm reverberates long after the moment. And today reminded us that eliminating restraint and isolation is not just necessary, it's possible. One step creates momentum. One commitment can change a culture. I welcome you to throw your commitments into the chat. I see people starting to add, stay curious, share information with a colleague, examining assumptions, yeah, strengthening relationships that support prevention. Pull people in as I push back on them. Work on listening to my teen rather than jumping in with plan A. Yeah, really centering our kids' experiences. Learn more on expectation management. Thanks, y'all. Thank you. Please continue adding those to the chat. As we close, I want to say thank you for your presence, for your courage, for your attention and your heart today. Really want to highlight our panel as well, the stories that y'all shared, the labor that it took for you to come into a space of a bunch of unknown folks and share such a delicate piece of yourselves. I thank you. That's really resonating with me. Every single story, strategy, moment of reflection pointed in one direction, and that's that we can eliminate restraint and isolation, not someday, but through the work we commit to now. So thank you. I encourage you to take a moment to complete the post-session survey with the QR code here. Stay connected with the CARE network for upcoming sessions, resources, and continued learning. I invite you to continue using the Padlet to share. Some of us reflect long after. I hope this stays with you long after our couple hours that we've had this morning. Within there, there'll also be materials. And again, thank you for being here, for showing up for our babies, for our students, for families, and for each other. This work continues beyond today, but today really strengthened our collective capacity to do it with integrity, skill, and care. So thank you. We hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I saw there was some follow-up trainings after